All right, so today we're going to talk about using the All Learners Network high leverage concepts and learning progressions, along with state standards and essential elements as a roadmap for inclusion and grade level aligned high quality instruction for students with complex cognitive needs, which is a mouthful, but we're going to break this down. So first of all, who are we talking about when I say complex needs? Because that's broad terms. So we're all on the same page. I'm using the definition of IDEA and the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities to talk about students who would typically fall under the disability category of an intellectual disability or an intellectual impairment. So these are learners who demonstrate significant limitations in both intellectual and adaptive functioning and behaviors before the age of 22. And just to give a little background information to understand one of the main reasons we're talking about this, when we think about special education, sort of central to current special ed is this understanding that students with severe disabilities should have access to the general education curriculum, which means that classroom content to the maximum extent possible. And this isn't just because we all want that to be a thing that we do because we believe in it, but it's actually a federal mandate. So just to highlight a few places more recently where these ideas come from, if we think about IDEA, which mandates that all students have the opportunity to learn grade level content based on grade level standards, to participate in state assessments of those standards, and have individualized education programs or IEPs that address how students will participate and progress in general education curriculum. More recently too, ESSA talks about college and career readiness for all students. The reauthorization of IDEA in 1997 clearly defined general education curriculum as the same curriculum for non-disabled children. And then also most recently as well in our Supreme Court case law, the Andrew case, which clarified that the standard for determining if a student's IEP is sufficient for the student to make progress. So we're no longer just writing IEP goals for students, but there's accountability to make sure that students are actually showing progress over time with the goals that we're writing. And again, these are the law, not just things that we think are good to do. So just to recap, the big ideas here are that all students have the right to access to grade level aligned instruction, access to high quality instruction, access to evidence-based intervention, career and college readiness, and IEPs that show progress over time. Sandy, do we have any questions in the chat yet?
Not yet.
Okay. So I'd like to take a minute and to have you all do a little like turn and talk. And what I mean is you're going to populate our chat, and I'm actually going to stop sharing for a minute here. What I want you to do is think about and populate our chat with what does instruction for students with complex needs typically look like? And what mathematical concepts does it typically involve? So we're going to start with that one. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see this chat too. And I can put that question in the chat, although it looks like TJ is doing that for us.
Thank you. Popped it in.
Perfect. Thank you. Time and money, facts and fluency. Yeah, that's a lot of what I see too, is the time and money. Fractions, expressions, equivalency, fluency. I'll give a few more seconds for people to populate. Skill and drill. Yes. Thank you, TJ. And then pull out during instruction or wherever the special educator can take the student, a lot of backfill. Sadly, I see a lot of skill and drill and fluency. And then to answer our second question, where does this instruction typically take place? Thanks, TJ. So where are students with our most complex needs typically receiving their math instruction? Pull out in small groups, pull out rooms, small group, outside the classroom, small rooms that have no natural light, small group. Yeah, I think we're seeing the pattern there. So if anybody else has anything to add, please do feel free to continue to populate, and Sandy can let me know. All right, so a lot of skill and drill outside of the classroom in small groups. I don't think that that's news to anybody, that that's typically what our students are learning and where their learning occurs. So I know that, well, I feel that a lot of you have seen this slide in presentations prior to just mine, but this idea of multi-layered systems of support is something I feel that we're all familiar with. But what I want us to talk about today is we're focusing right now on layer 1, grade level content for all. And yes, I am talking about, for our most complex learners, that inclusion in that grade level content in the classroom. So all the trees together receiving that same sun and water in our forest of diverse species. So all of us together. So I love to read lots of articles, and just wanted to share this quote. Students with severe disabilities who were in more inclusive groups, so spent 75 to 100% of their day in general education classrooms, were more likely to be learning information linked to standards. Students who were in less inclusive groups, out of the classroom most of their day, were more likely to be learning material linked to IEP goals. So this is a real big difference. So what does this mean? Learning linked to standards versus learning linked to IEP goals. So IEPs provide specialized instruction to help students access their grade level aligned classroom-based content. IEPs are not curriculum. So if we have students that are pulled out all, for the bulk of their day, and they're really just focusing on that IEP, they're not really accessing that grade level content. And that's denying them that access that, federally we're asked to make sure that they have. So why does this happen? So we have these mandates, and they tell us to give access to general education curriculum. It needs to happen, but these mandates don't tell us how it should happen or what it should look like. And in a lot of the reading and research I've done, this is where teachers feel frustrated, because they know that it needs to happen, but we don't know how to do this very well, because there's no real clear map to do it. So what we're going to talk about is the how and the what. And it's very brief, so we only have an hour. So I want us to think about instruction for our students, that the focus of our math instruction matters. The right narrow focus will widen the access. So we talked, when you all were populating the chat earlier, you talked about a lot of time and money, which is a very narrow focus. But it's not focusing on the big ideas that are really going to give our students the most leverage or the most opportunity for growth. Focusing on really sideload concepts, although narrow, doesn't widen their access to more understanding and deeper learning. So we want to make sure that the what that we're focusing on is the correct narrow focus, to make sure that we're optimizing or gap closing, narrowing that gap between what these students have access to and what we're asking them to learn. So that's where this high leverage concept comes in. Oh, and I wanted to say, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this today, but it is important because, again, back to the skill and drill, the how we're teaching matters too. So really making sure that for all students, we're really thinking about this conceptual understanding, that we're asking these students to make sure that they're having comprehension, making connections between concepts, known to unknown, flexible use of numbers and their relationships, explanation of method, the how, sharing their strategies with peers to communicate their understanding. This is the pedagogy piece that we're not going to spend a bulk of time talking on today, but I just couldn't let it go without mentioning that this is important for all learners too, even our most complex ones. Sometimes I think there's a tendency to have what I like to refer to as performative learning, where we really map out like the steps of instruction, first this, then this, then this, and the kids do that. But we don't ever ask them to make those deeper cognitive connections, that comprehension piece that develops that conceptual understanding. And that's really important too. So as the child gains conceptual understanding, computational procedures are remembered better and used more flexibly to solve new problems. And that's for any type of learner. So back to this idea of choosing the correct narrow focus to widen the understanding. We really want to look at those concepts that are going to give us the most leverage for our learning. So again, we have to make sure that we're teaching grade level aligned. And so use of our state standards, the essential elements, the all learners network learning progressions, and high leverage concepts together really makes this very clear roadmap of where we want that narrow focus to be and how we can make sure it's aligned to that grade level content, even for our students who we would say that they're off level learners. We can still ensure that what we are doing in the class is thoughtful and intentional and aligned very, very intentionally to what's happening with that instruction in their classrooms. So I wanted to give you a minute. You saw in the chat, Ashley made sure that you had access to a couple different links. The first one I want us to focus in on, because we're going to do a little walk through our third grade students. And if you can click on that first link to the third grade high leverage concepts, I just want people to take a minute to remind themselves about what we're talking about when we're thinking about that narrow focus for third grade. So I'll give you all a minute to navigate to that document and revisit it. And please do feel free to populate the chat with any questions that you have while looking at it. But again, focusing on that third grade. So we're really thinking about multiplication and division within 100. And this talks about the different models that we can use, connections that we can make with those models, and different ways of thinking about that instruction for intervention and the models that we'd want to use for instruction. And the next one we're going to navigate to are the third grade learning progressions. And I'm going to give you a little bit more time to look at this link. We're going to spend about 3 minutes here, really making sure that you're understanding how this trajectory or progression develops over time. It's important to understand with our learning progressions and any of these concepts for students that we can't shortcut them. We can certainly teach students like mnemonics and ways that they can memorize the procedures to get to a concept. But if we really want them to understand it, for any student, they really have to hit these different progressions or parts of it along the way. So making sure that we are familiar with it helps us know how to break it down into pieces that make it very much more accessible for our students that have more complex needs. So take a minute and just look at how this progression develops from September to June for our third grade students, focusing on multiplicative reasoning. All right. Now we're going to look at this third grade aligned learning document. So this document takes the high leverage concept, multiply and divide numbers within 100 in context and equations, and it links in the essential elements that directly align with that high leverage concept. So in this case, and for those of you who are not maybe familiar with the essential elements, they are research and evidence-based elements that take some of the state standards, well, all the state standards, and really boil them down to their essential pieces. So what within this understanding, what are the steps that get us there? So I like looking at third grade because it's such a high leverage grade, like 3, 4, and 5. We spend a lot of time thinking about those 3 grades. So in third grade, this idea of multiplying and dividing is very central. So if we want to think about what are the precursors that get us there, those steps that we can't skip, we have to make sure we understand in order to build that conceptual understanding of multiplication. It's this idea of repeated addition to find the total number of objects and determine the sum, to count by tens using models such as objects, base 10 blocks, or money, And another one that works really well with this one is solving one-step real-world problems using addition and subtraction within 20. If you look at the link to that document and you click on the blue link within this essential element piece here, and we're going to come back to this document in a minute, but what I want you to see is you will see these linkage level descriptions. And what these do are take that idea of to solve repeated addition problems by representing the problem using an equation and finding the sum using an addition strategy such as skip counting. Like, that's where we want the students to be able to be. But if they're not there yet, we have a bunch of steps that we need to make sure we hit along the way to get us there. So if we have a student who's really just working on communicating this idea of separateness by recognizing that we can separate objects or join them together, and that's where they are with their communication, that's fine. We're still building on that grade level aligned learning trajectory that is a precursor to multiplicative understanding. And it's still very much a thoughtful and valid way that we can have students engage with the idea of building towards multiplication in an inclusive classroom setting. So I want to give people some time to look at those two things. So I'm just going to back up. To navigate yourself to this third grade content alignment document. And within that document, clicking on the essential element linkage level descriptions that really unpack at each one of those areas all the steps that we can hit to build on to get to that understanding of multiplicative thinking. And again, Sandy and TJ are helping monitor the chat for questions that are popping up. And we're going to have a lot of time at the end to also talk as a group about this stuff too, because it's a lot to be looking at all at once. And I do recognize that. All right, so what does this look like in our classroom? We have students who have learning needs in a range. And we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of those students in that classroom. So I am making an assumption here that because many of you have been at this conference for this is your third time and this is the last presentation, that you have seen the idea or been introduced to the idea of the math menu. And for anybody who has not, it's part of the tenets of our instruction at All Learners, where we say menu time is a time for students to have that independent practice and learning. And now, granted, a lot of the students with more complex needs maybe have somebody working with them to assist them with their communication or motor skills or whatever their barriers to access are. But the content of the classroom hopefully won't be one of them. So this is a way that we can create an in-class learning experience for our students with more complex needs. So we can hand this menu out to our class, and they have have tos and they have can dos. And on these are ones that there's a variety here that represents the needs of many different kinds of learners in a third grade classroom. So you have a link to that menu. And I want to give people some time to look through and see how this menu addresses the needs of a variety of learners in the classroom, including those with the most complex needs. And again, we are going to have time to come back together and talk about all these things, but I'm going to go ahead and give you 2 minutes to look through, which I know is not nearly enough time. So bringing us back to just recap what we've looked at quickly, this idea that we can support our most complex learners in our classroom-based instruction. So within the forest with all our diverse trees and species, that this is really where we want them to be to make sure that they're having the opportunity to have all that great robust learning that their peers are accessing as well. And how we're going to get there is through use of our state standards, our essential elements, the learning progressions, and the high leverage concepts, because the high leverage concepts and the learning progressions make sure that when we narrow the focus, we're narrowing it in the right places to make sure that we're then maximizing what they later have access to as far as mathematical understandings, along with this idea of conceptual understanding within our instruction as well. And on that document, I will add these in momentarily. Well, they're already there. I just have to change the color because they're hidden at the bottom, all in white. You have access to the essential elements in math for kindergarten through grades 12, so that you can look through and explore and overlay them with the high leverage concepts and see which ones you really want to be focusing on to make sure that your students are having their needs met within that classroom-based instruction time in a very thoughtful and intentional way. So I have left, very intentionally, time for us to have some discussion around this, and also time if you want to just take a peek at these documents and have questions as you go through. So I'm going to leave this time for final thoughts and questions. I'm going to unshare my screen so that we can see each other and just have a conversation, because this work is hard. And I'm sure that there are many questions, and we went through a lot of information. So I am curious about what kinds of questions people have about this work or the documents or anything that we've looked at. And you can type them in the chat, or you can popcorn them out, or you can use your hands up reaction.
Hey, Glenn, one of the things that I struggle with, and I find a lot of educators struggle with, is the idea of thinking about things I do to give access to current grade level content or instruction, like core instruction, versus things I do to address kind of missed opportunities in the past. Like, can you talk a little bit about like the balance of that? How do you balance that? Does that make
I'm
sense?
wondering, I just want to clarify so that I understand what you're asking me. So are you talking in classroom-based instruction, how much time you're prioritizing to missed information versus new information for all of our students together?
No, I'm talking about when you're really focused on like a student with complex needs, like how much is, working towards what's happening at their grade level, and how much is like, this is what I know they need that they still haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, so the great thing about the high leverage concepts is it makes it really clear to us where we need to focus. So, and with the assessments, and I have adapted those assessments many, many times to work with students who are nonverbal, who have visual impairments, who are comorbid with both, to make sure that they can utilize that assessment so that I can pinpoint where their needs are and then pull from that high leverage concept. Okay, because again, we can't skip things. There's no shortcutting. We can't just jump right in to multiplication without shoring up that additive reasoning, as you're referring to. So that's really important. So I use my specialized instruction time. So my time where I maybe am doing some one-on-one instruction to do that backfilling, but that classroom time and that menu is really where I'm looking at, okay, I want to make sure they're having access to their grade level aligned instruction. And then when they're doing their independent menu time, I might use that to do some backfill. And I might also incorporate into that menu some of their just like building towards that multiplicative understanding. But when I'm doing that pull out, that one-on-one, that's where I'm really focusing very intently on those missing pieces that they have to have in order to keep progressing.
I wonder, Glenn, if you can speak to about how you can provide an inclusive environment during main lesson, because a lot of what we just talked about was about how you could differentiate and perhaps include during menu time. But there's a question about main lesson and how do you include every student?
Yeah, and I'm gonna start by talking about launch, because that's where our students start, right? And so we know that we can make launches very inclusive by using different types of images that are accessible to all students. So that to me is like, great. That one is not super hard for us to think about differentiating. When we come into that main lesson, that is a bit more complicated. So we're wanting to make sure that that is maybe a time where the student is included in a thoughtful manner around, maybe it's just receiving that instruction, but ideally it can also be a time for a double dip. So I like to think about these are times where the main idea for their focus is going to be targeted when we're thinking about where they can access that math and making sure that we're including examples that are at their just right level for learning and a little bit beyond to stretch them. But also this is a great place to build in our communication skills. So if we have a student that's working on using their talker, this is a great time to be modeling that by echoing what the teacher is saying on their talker, not asking them to talk, to produce language, but showing them how to navigate to different parts of their math content on their screens within that communication device. It's also a great time to have restating in that device what their peers are saying, so that they're getting a double dip of hearing, oh, this is what the teacher said, here's how my friend restated it, let me restate it again for you on your device. If we have students that have visual impairments, this is a really great way to be thoughtful and intentional about how we're building in a few core visual pieces for them to access tactily, or maybe just to see in a different way. There's lots of different ways to layer in what that focus during that main instruction is, a main lesson. And aside from just being present, there really does need to be thoughtful things happening there. And this is a great way where we can bring in our occupational therapists, our physical therapists, our speech and language providers, our visual impairment assistants, to help us think about creatively, what do we want to be focusing on this time? Because it's a great opportunity to do more push in rather than pull out for that double dip.
I also think, Glenn, it's really important to think about the collaboration between different educators with different roles is really the critical piece of getting at the core of that question. And aren't you doing a workshop coming up the end of March?
Yeah, I am, about the collaboration between the different providers. And
let me just drop that in the chat.
Thanks, DJ.
Yeah.
That's certainly something I have done a lot of recently too, is really working with occupational and physical therapists to design math menus that are that double dip. So if we have students that are working on fine motor grasp, we might have them, pull out the chopsticks and be working within a tens frame and manipulating objects during their menu time. And that menu is really based around the fine motor skills that we're developing, or the gross motor skills that we're developing at their just right independent math instructions. So again, a way to minimize the pullout and really think about how do we push in.
Glenn, I'm a high school special education teacher. My name's Mary King, and today I co-teach in an algebra class. And today we're just entering quadratics, and I had a small group that I was working on prime numbers up to 100, so that tomorrow I can work on factoring, so I can get them to the point where my intention is to discuss these things so that when they're factoring out the polynomials, the students I'm working with can grasp the idea of us factoring out the numbers, these prime numbers. And I started with just a sheet of 1 through 100 and a multiplication sheet that went up to like 20 by 20, so that they could see the numbers that were their prime numbers after they got through 10, or actually after they got through 20, all the numbers after that, if the number was on the list, they knew, or if the number was within the frame, they knew that it wasn't a prime number, it was a composite number. But do you have something that would be a little more fun, or an idea that I could do, or an activity I could do that would be like, they enjoyed it, but I just would like something a little more dynamic or a little more fun, especially for tomorrow when I'm going into doing factoring prime numbers.
Yeah, I wonder a couple of things. When you're talking about these charts, did they help build these charts in any way? Did they help create the charts?
No, I think this is something I pulled off of YouCubed.
Okay. I think it can be really powerful to have the students help create the models that they then use, or the materials or the papers. So any kind of chart, any kind of, anything they're going to be engaging or interacting with, like a visual, it's helpful to have them create it so they understand where it's coming from. So even having them build prime numbers and build different composite numbers and talk about how they're the same, how they're different, what they notice and what they wonder about those numbers, looking at them built out as models can be a really powerful tool in helping them conceptually understand what those numbers mean and what they are and how they can be broken apart and what's that leftover piece and what does it all mean, which, it takes a while to do that discussion and get them comfortable asking those questions and making those connections. And then from that, to build the resources that they're going to use based on their understandings is a really powerful way to help them understand what's happening with those numbers.
Okay.
I don't know, Sandy and Jay, if you all have thoughts as well about that.
Yeah, I was going to say a really good way
You're here
to build.
too. I forgot you were here.
That's good. That was the whole point. A good way, Mary, to find prime numbers is to have the kids construct rectangles, right? Because a prime number, were you going to say that, Sandy? Did I just take that away?
Yes, exactly.
So a prime number only has one rectangle. One. Hi, Heidi. Good to see you too. It's just one and then the number, right? So it's only one, but every other composite number has multiple rectangles. The other thing I really recommend for quadratics is that you give the students the equation y equals x squared. So any of you that do high school or don't do high school, this is a great activity. You get GeoGebra, or what's the other one?
Yeah.
What's the other graphing thing that high school?
Desmos?
Desmos, thank you.
Yeah,
we have access to both.
Great. So I use GeoGebra because, you know, I'm old. But anyway, you give the equation y equals x squared up there, right? And it produces a parabola. So then you tell them, what can you do to this equation to make the parabola skinnier or fatter? How can you shift it up or down? How can you move it left or right? So all of those conversations that start with their exploration are going to lead them to, you know, why does it get skinnier? Well, the y is getting faster with the x. You're getting bigger y's for each x, just like a graph, just like a line, right? So you can help them make connections through those things. So I love starting with y equals x squared and getting them to find out all those things, because it will be them doing the work instead of the teacher standing up in front of them and saying, well, if you do this to y equals x squared, then you get this outcome. And it just goes right.
We're doing IM, illustrative math, and a lot of this stuff is embedded in it. And so they get to play with those kinds of tools, and that's really fun. But I'm working with these students with these complex needs that I'm just trying to get them to understand factoring before we get to the play. Yeah, so that's kind of more where I was. But thank you very much.
Well, do you feel like your question was answered? Was that helpful?
It is helpful. I liked the rectangle thing. Totally going to use it, and having them build a model to use. I think that's where I'm going to go next tomorrow. So thank you.
Any questions or thoughts or wonderings about any of the resources that we looked at?
Can I add? So Glenn shared the progressions document. And I just want you to be aware that we're revising and making them even better and more useful to teachers. So while the example she shared was wonderful, and you can certainly use it, just keep your eyes on our website, because you'll see probably during the next few months brand new progressions that really illuminate the models that will enhance student learning that we could use as instructors, but they're unbelievably rich documents.
Well, I wonder if anybody has any other questions about doing this work with students in general. John and I spend time doing assessment work and a lot of diagnostic work to really dig deep and understand where students with more complex needs are with their math understanding. And I do a lot of work in Vermont. We have what we call the I team, which is our team that's statewide that works with students around our state with complex needs. And I do a lot of math consulting with them. So building their programs and helping think about IEP goals and accommodations. But the biggest part that I find is that teaming piece that has the biggest impact on student success with accessing and understanding. And once we have not just the math teacher and special educator at the table, but sometimes schools have math coaches, and getting those people pulled into helping us think about planning very thoughtfully and intentionally for our students with more complex needs, we end up with some really robust programs for students where they're sitting in their classrooms and they are really leading their own learning and doing their own thinking and able to pull in peers to have, them talk about what they know and understand. And I'm talking about kids. I've had deafblind, nonverbal, and we've been able to talk about really robust, thoughtful math instruction for those students and see progress. So it isn't that I'm just saying this because I think it's neat. Like, I believe in this work, and I know that we can really find where all students are and help them make gains and close those gaps that they have with their peers. So that's something else. If people have questions about that or want to talk about specific students, like you can always, send me emails. And John and I do work in schools all the time around, really thinking about clinically how to write good plans for these students. So just to put that out there.
I just have a question. Do the dynamic learning maps, because I've used those, because a couple of years ago during COVID, when we were remote almost every week, I did have a visually impaired student, and it was I had to use some of those dynamic learning maps. But is it just dynamiclearningmaps.org? Like, I can't remember how to get there, and I lost the bookmark.
The link, I will uncolor mute it for you so that you have a link to all of the ones. And I just linked in the math ones, but you should be able to navigate to the literacy ones from there.
Well, it's just been they're very helpful. And I think I do work in a co-teaching model with my special educator, but there is still this feeling that, like you articulated very nicely, the IEP is not the curriculum, but a lot of our special educators are so focused on getting those goals. And it's like, yes, we want them to know time and money. However, like that's not the end all and be all. And so just having that dynamic learning map, I think, is nice because it gives that developmental progression a little bit more specifically and labels like the different learning stages. So that's why I was just curious about making sure we all have that link beyond the third grade.
I highly recommend really thinking about the essential elements partnered with the high leverage concepts, because it is not going to be realistic to think that you're going to cover every single thing in great depth that you need to, especially for students that have these gaps. We really do need to think about focusing on the concepts that are going to help our students make the most growth over time and access from one grade level to the next, those really big high leverage concepts. So the maps that we have at All Learners, they are evidence, they are research-based, they are really thinking robustly about what kids need to know at each specific grade level to progress well to the next. And so knowing that we really do have to narrow that focus. And we all know that time money trap that these students get caught in, and they never seem to get away from it. And so really being thoughtful about navigating towards concepts that are narrow, but at the end of the day, give access to so much more math than just the siloed time and money. It's really important. Well, please do not hesitate to shoot us an email if things come up for you later. I'm always happy to answer questions, and I love talking about this stuff, so I can talk forever about it. And I'm happy to do so. So I look forward to hearing from you all. And please also, TJ shared in there the upcoming, we're doing a clinical interviews course for IEPs, but also the communication and collaboration with specialists workshop that's coming up soon as well. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Sandy, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I just want to say thank you. And thank you to everyone who spent their afternoon, part of their afternoon with us. It was great to have you learn with us.
Enjoy your evening.